You're now recording. Okay. Let me minimize you guys down a little here. So, as you all stepped into Grasshopper, hopefully most of you have stepped into Grasshopper. You have had some success or some, hopefully some success. So tonight we're going to go a little bit more over kind of some basic ideas. They'll be very primitive in nature, things that you could obviously much quicker and more easily do by hand in Rhino than by using Grasshopper. But knowing these basic tools, is how you start to leverage some of those, the more advanced topics down the line. So we'll roughly go over kind of the toolbar here at the top, very quickly, and then we will dive into some more specifics. So like I said, this first toolbar is kind of what we call like the parameters toolbar, or params. And this has a bunch of good things in it, but most of these do not actually generate anything, right? So like you all probably did, if some of you did the loft command, like we showed in class last time, you probably used this curve selection tool. It does not actually generate anything in Rhino. Nothing pops up over here. In fact, it pops up as an error. So it is yellow like this, which means nothing is coming out of it. If you hover over the little speech bubble here, it says that it hasn't collected any data, so it's not actually useful. Similar for all these other tools. So this here is a point tool. Let's see, we got a circle, we got kind of all the basic shapes, some 3D objects, surfaces, all those kind of things. So like I said, these don't actually generate anything. These kind of typically collect things. So they collect points or they collect curves that you either select or you have created previously, right? So they are very useful, but they don't actually create anything. This second, so that's in the geometry toolbar here. And then the second is the primitive toolbar. This is very useful. And there are a few very in particular useful elements in here. One of which is the number command. And there's an integer command. And yeah, those are kind of the two main ones. There's some color, some other domains, things. We'll get into those things later. Those are a little bit more complex. There's a file path. Like I said before, you can leverage Excel or other programs through Grasshopper into Rhino. So sometimes you need to get the file path that this Excel file is located in. So that's how you would kind of pull that in. For these tools down here, so like for the number and integer, they can do the same thing as these ones up here and collect things from Rhino. So for example, if I draw a line here, and I wanted to put that into the curve tool, I can click on the this curve parameter. I can right click, and I can set one curve, and I can select that curve, and now that is no longer an error, and I've collected that curve. Same for a point or a circle. I can grab a point here. So I can set one point. I can also set multiple points, and then I can also set a circle. So by right clicking, I can set one circle or multiple circles. Oh, it's actually wanting me to draw the circle. Let's set one circle. Oh, that's weird. Okay, I'd actually never set a circle before, so I didn't realize you had to draw it. So, so there we go. We got that. And I think if I was to set a point and select a circle, it won't let me select something that isn't a point, right? So I can't select anything that isn't that. So that's just collecting those objects. You can see they highlight in green over there like that. One second, my dog's having some issues. Let me just. Boop, boop, boop. Sorry, my dog's whining about going outside. For these other tools, so the number tool, this is the number and integer Do we all know what the difference between a number and an integer is? It's kind of shown on this symbol right here.
Integers are whole numbers, I think, right?
Yeah, integer is a whole number, so no decimal points, no fractions, nothing like that. And a number could be a whole number, but it can also be 1.567344. So sometimes you want exact numbers, sometimes you want an integer. So for these, similarly to how you can set lines and points to these parameters up here, you can set an integer, or you can set an integer or set a number, right? So if I right click on the integer, you can see down here that I want to set an integer, and I can actually hover over here and I could type in 10 and I can commit changes. And now if I just hover over top of this, you'll see right below my mouse there, it says one locally defined value, and it's 10. And if I was to right click and change that, I could clear it, or I can change it to 100. Commit changes and I hover over it, and now it's 100. Similarly for the number, you can set whatever you want in here, and it will keep that number in there, right? So this is very useful when you want a specific value that you want to throw into something. The next palette over here, we'll call, is the input. Lots of things on here that you may or may not use, but the two most important ones are these top two, which is the number slider and the panel. I think you'll probably use these two more than most other nodes that you find in Grasshopper. So I just click on the number slider, and if I click on the panel, which is this little squiggly guy, you'll see this, right? So what the panel does, that is very important, is sometimes things as you'll see later, things will get complicated, and you'll get what are called lists, or you'll kind of, it's like, what is coming out of this node? Like, I don't understand what the values are in here. But if you plug any node into a panel, it basically will just report what is coming out of that. So I plug it out, obviously the number 100 is coming out. I plug the circle in, it says, hey, you have a circle of this radius. I plug a point in, it tells me that there's one point coming out. I plug the polyline in, it tells me that I have one referenced polyline curve. So this is just good to kind of watch what is coming out of a node, right? And basically whatever is coming in, it basically just tells you what's coming in, it tells you what it is, and then it just passes it right back out. So this is very useful to just see what's kind of happening when your scripts get more and more complex. The number slider is probably the thing you'll use almost all the time. Almost every script at some point is going to have a number slider in it. And a number slider is basically exactly what it says. It's a slider that you can shift up and down. And if I plug this into here, you'll see that it pumps out whatever number I slide to. So this is good for things when you want to change sizes, or you want to adjust how many of something is, let's say you're copying something 10 times. But now I want to copy it 20 times. So you can put a number slider in there and move it from 10 to 20 or something. So we'll use these a lot. And if you double click on the number slider, this command comes up, which basically allows you to kind of edit the number slider. So one thing you can do is, change the name of the slider, and it will read the slider will tell you what's coming out, or whatever you type in there, right? This is good because you might have 10 or 15 of these in a script, and you may want to remember like where this is actually going to, right? So naming them is good, and being organized when you're creating these is very helpful, especially when you're coming at them later or working in groups and things like that. Another important part of this is these selections right here. So right now it's a floating point number, which is basically just kind of a number, like it's not an integer. So it can be anything from 0 to 1, right? So if I double click, so you can see that it's a minimum value. Let me go back up here. There's a minimum value of 0, a maximum value of 1, and it's going to change, its range is 1, and it's currently this number right here. I can also slide it right here. If I wanted it to go higher than 1, I can double click in the max, and I can say I want this to go to 20. Hit OK. Oops. So now it's way down here, but you can see I can now slide it all the way up to 20 and any number in between, and it's up, up to 3 digits of decimal place, right? So that's good to kind of be able to change that. And, as you need to, you can also change it to integer numbers, right? So I change it to integers, I hit OK, and now it's only going to give me whole numbers from 1 to 20. And you can change it from 1 to whatever, where you could say the lowest value I want is 10, and the highest value I want is 986. So now the lowest I can be is 10, and I can go all the way up. So you can change those whenever you want. And it's helpful to, you don't always want it to be like to 100,000 or something, because you may want to be a little bit more refined in your choice, but you can't always change it. There's also only even numbers and only odd numbers, which you may or may not need sometimes. So these are very important. You'll use these a lot. And I'll probably use them in just our brief thing tonight, just so you can see how useful they are. So those are very important. Next on the list, so the next panel here is kind of your operators. So this is kind of, addition and subtraction. So I can throw an addition node in here. And this is the first, of these, this is the first thing you'll see that has 2 inputs, right? And if you hover over the inputs, it'll tell you kind of what it's expecting, right? So it's expecting the first item for addition, and it's expecting the second item for addition, right? So if I wanted to add this number, which is 100, so I put that in A, I put this in 344, this number 344 into there, and you'll see that it pops out those 2 things added together. And if I change it, it'll change, right? So it has all of the basic math, multiplication, division, subtraction, make things negative, factorials, all kinds of stuff that we will get into later. Not all of them, but a lot of them will come up. So these are all kind of math tools that you may or may not need. If anybody also in this toolbar is kind of like, you can create expressions, or you can use C script or C+ script, Visual Basic script, or Python, things like that. If any of you are skilled in that, you can get things like the time of day or construct a time of day, all kind of trigonometry, all kinds of math tools, right? Moving on, we won't get into this super deep right now. We'll get into them later. These are kind of creating lists. These are various sets. So something that is pretty easy to understand out of this, you can create series of things. So sometimes you may want a whole list of numbers, right? So this creates a series of numbers, right? So this is expecting 3 different plugs into it, right? So it wants to know what's the first number, how many times, or what is the step. So the next number is going to be how many numbers away, right? So, I want you to step by 1 number, or by 2, or by 3. And then how many times do you want me to do that, right? So you can see that if you hover over these, there are basic values currently in there, right? So you can plug nothing into this and it's already has something coming out, right? So it says 1 locally defined value is 0. It is stepping by 1, by one thing, and it's doing that 10 times, right? So if I plug that node, or I plug that into the panel, you'll see that I'm starting at 0 and going up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 9. It's important to know, and you'll learn this over time, that all lists in here always start with the number 0. They don't start with the number 1. So if you wanted it to go to 10, like I wanted my last value to be 10, then I need to go up 11. I need to change this count to 11, right? So if I was to come in here to my integer, this is my integer. I'm going to set this integer to 11, plug this into the count, and you'll see that it's added 1 value there. That's 10. I could also say that, I want it to start at 10. So you can plug the same node into multiple things, right? If I want to use this number for multiple reasons. So let's say I wanted it to start at 10. So it's, or start at 11, I'm sorry. So it's starting at 11 and it's going up by 1, 2, 3, 13, 14, 15, all the way to 21. can also make it step by 11. So now it's going 11, 22, 33, 44, you know, all the way up to 121, right? So this is very, very good for setting up, you know, multiple, you know, kind of creating a series of numbers that you then use later on. We'll get into all these kind of lists and things later. It'll get complicated quick. So we're gonna skip over that for now. But these will become more and more important over time. We got that. So then next on the list, we have vectors. That's what this is here, vector. So does anybody remember back to physics, their physics classes or maybe calculus or something like that, what a vector is?
Direction and magnitude.
Yeah, there we go. Direction and magnitude, right? So whenever you were calculating the, let's see if I can draw on the screen here. Whenever you were throwing a ball in an arc like so, it's a very bad arc, but when you were throwing a ball in an arc, and if you knew what its, it would have like two different vectors, right? It has a vector that is going in this direction and a vector that is going in this direction, right? And that creates the actual, you know, so you had an X component and a Y component, which created this kind of vector in this path, right? So a vector is a direction and a magnitude, perfectly said. And that is very important in Grasshopper. Like I said before, with the when I was creating the movie theater script, where the screen was located that generated a vector, right? The screen was kind of projecting in a direction, which was a vector. So I needed to figure out what vector is important to me in that script to understand how to kind of lay the rest of that theater out, right? You'll see over here, the very last panel here is your vectors, right? So you have X, Y, and Z. And if I took this, you'll see that it is defined as, you know, 3 values. So it's an X, Y, Z component, right? So this is just an X vector, and it's just going one unit of magnitude in the X direction. If I plug a number into the front of this, you'll see, which this was 11, you'll see that it is now going a magnitude of 11 in the X direction, right? So vectors are important. You can create a vector from all the different components, right? So if it was not a straight vector in the X direction, you can kind of tell it all the different components to get a vector in that specific direction. You could figure out what a vector is. So if a vector is coming from somewhere else, you can plug that vector in and it'll tell you what the components are. So if I plugged, this is a vector right here. If I plug this into there, it should tell me, since it's an X vector and it's 11, what should I plug from this to find out what the magnitude is? Which one of these should I plug into this panel? So there's 3 plugs.
X.
So I take the X component, plug in there, and it tells me 11, right? If I plug in the Y, it says 0. If I plug in the Z, it says 0. But I can figure out what the X component is of this vector as needed. Like, you know, it seems weird. You know, this is more demonstration purposes, but sometimes vectors will get generated somewhere else, right? And you want to find out what its components are. So that's how you might do that. Some other things you can do in this panel. Is you can construct points and deconstruct points, right? So I have a point right here. I'm just going to deselect this for a second. So I have a point in, actually, let me keep, no, leave it like, so I put this point into Rhino, right? But sometimes you may not want to build anything in Rhino and you don't want to select I don't want to have to put a point in and select it. So I can create a point myself, right? So I can come in here and I can construct a point. So let's see here. I'm going to actually bring this back. I'm going to select this point just so I can get what its value is. So I have a point here that I selected that point and created it. I can deconstruct that point to see what its exact location is. And see what its exact location is. If I go back to vector, go back to point, I can deconstruct a point, right? So it's asking me, what point do you want to deconstruct? I have this point right here. So I'm going to select that. And if I get my panel back, if you double click, just so everybody knows, a quick way, sometimes this is how I do a lot of it. I try not to when I'm teaching, but if you double click on an empty canvas, you can just search for things. So I want a panel. So I typed in panel and I can drop a panel quickly. I can see what the various components are of that point. So I know that the X component is 35.22, yada, yada, yada. The Y component is -7 and its Z component is 0, right? If I was to move this point in the Z direction, I can find out what that component is. Just so everybody knows, when you're plugging something in, you just click and plug. If you want to plug multiple things into the same node, you plug and you hold shift and you'll see that that little plus sign pops up and it will allow you to connect multiple things to the same point, right? And it'll just generate a list as in the order in which you put them in. If you want to take something out, you can hold, select it, you can hold the control button and plug it back into it, where it was coming from, and it'll remove it. So if I wanted to, I can, so here I have a number, a number node, right? I'm going to Control V and select 3 different, and create and copy paste 3 different numbers there. I can plug these into these numbers, right? And I can get just those numbers out. And if I wanted to, I don't know why I would want to do this, I could reconstruct the same exact point by plugging those numbers into here, right? So it's, that's a pretty useless script right there, but it's the same point, but this one is generated because I selected it right here. This one is generated purely in Rhino or in Grasshopper, right? So it doesn't actually exist in Rhino. So I'm just going to delete this, and I will set some numbers here. So this, so you can see that right there, that little dot, that little X, that is the point that I created. And if I change these numbers, or actually I'll swap one of these numbers out with a slider, like so, plug it there. I'll delete this just to make this a little clearer. I'm going to make this not that big. I'm going to make this down to 100. Okay. You see I have a point right here. And if I slide that, you'll see that I can move that point around on the X, along the X axis. If I delete that, I can copy and paste this 3 times. And I can plug all of these in, and I can move it in all the directions. And I can move it in Y, I can move it in X. And if I plug Z in, it'll shift up, and I can move it in the Z direction, right? So this does not exist in Rhino at all. There is technically nothing in this file right now in terms of geometry. And like we talked about, if I was to right click on this, can I bake a point? Yeah, right click on this and bake. I pick a layer, I hit OK. Now I have a point there in that spot. But if I move it, that point does not move because I baked it in. It's no longer connected, right? So does all of that in general make sense? And, I know it's very basic, some of that, but does it kind of, do you understand the parameters and how you might, add, how you can select things from Rhino into, or from Rhino into Grasshopper. You can do it with all kinds of things, curves, lines, surfaces, solids, all that kind of stuff. And how you might generate points and vectors and things like that. And also particularly number sliders and that kind of stuff. Any questions on, or what questions do folks have? Okay, not good. Okay.
I have a general Grasshopper question.
Sure.
When you've done all this work here in Grasshopper, you have your thing. Do you have to save it in Grasshopper for it to save? Or
yes.
Can you save the Rhino file and then it'll automatically save Grasshopper?
So it does not automatically save. Normally when you go to close Rhino and you have not saved your Grasshopper script, it'll ask you, do you want to save your Grasshopper script? So I can save this file, save document. I'm just going to save it to Jefferson folder here. You see that it's saving down here as a Grasshopper file, a GH file, so I can save that and watch now. So I'm going to close out. You see that this X here, which is being generated from this node, is just an X. If I was to close out of Grasshopper, I no longer have that X. It disappeared. I still have this point because that's actually in Rhino, but I do not have the X. So if I go back and I open up Grasshopper again, I just opened it right back up to the file that I had just saved. But if I wanted to, I could go to open and open that file and it'll put that point right back where it was supposed to be. But if I open this Grasshopper file with any Rhino file, it's going to put that point right in that location, right? So similar to your question before about, can I use these scripts into multiple files? This Grasshopper script is not specifically tied to this Rhino file, right? The only time it is when I select something in it, right? So this is the point tool, the point parameter. I'm going to set one point. I'm going to select that point, and I have this point selected, right? So if I come back over here and I save the Grasshopper file, and I go to a new Rhino file with that point does not exist in this file, right? And I open up Grasshopper. So you'll see that I have a point, I have my X, but I do not have my other point, right? Because that point does not exist in this file. And behind the scenes of Rhino is like, we're seeing a visual representation of points, lines, and circles and all that kind of stuff, but it's all just ones and zeros and all that kind of stuff. So every object in Rhino has some sort of element ID that it knows what that element is. But this element does not, the ID for this element doesn't exist in this file because it's not in this file, right? So that's the only time that these things are when a file is kind of specific, a Rhino file is specific to a Grasshopper file. Does that make sense?
I have a question.
Yep, go for it.
So you mentioned, hold on, because it's kind of a tricky wording. Okay, so you mentioned if you wanted to, say, take multiple nodes back into one node, you hold shift. What about, do you have to do anything if you're doing, say, one node into multiple nodes? Like you had one earlier, I don't really remember exactly what the example was, but you were plugging, I think it was an integer, into multiple nodes. Did you have to hold shift to do that?
Yeah, so if I wanted this point to be 38 on all of these on X, Y, and Z coordinate, right? I first click that little bubble, and I now have my arrow. I hold shift, I see the plus sign, and I can plug that into the multiple nodes, right? So now I can have that in multiple places and move it accordingly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, gotcha.
Because you see it's moving at a diagonal now rather than, because they're all, it's all equal, right? So if I unplug it, I hold Alt or I hold Control and come back, I'll now move in the diagonal, along X and Y axis only. So yeah, shift always allows you to, plug one thing into multiple things, or unplug things is Control. So actually, now that I'm thinking about your question, you actually don't have to. You can always plug this into multiple. You don't actually have to hold shift. Only when the plug is, there's multiple things going into the same bubble. So I guess you don't have to hold shift now that I think about it.
Gotcha.
Any other questions?
Is there a way to delete one of the ties between two nodes?
Like if I wanted to not have it connected to Z, get rid of that one. Yeah. So if I click on, so you kind of, doesn't matter. I don't think it matters which direction you go, but I want to unplug this slider from the Z. If I click and I hold Control, you'll see there's a minus. And I just plug it in like I was going to plug it in, and then it unplugs it. That makes sense?
Yep. Cool.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Okay, so let's demonstrate some other, one other small, you create some shapes using Grasshopper that are very easy to create in Rhino, but it's important to kind of understand how they work. So I'm going to go to the curve, and there's a bunch of other panels that we'll get to as we go. There's curves, there's surfaces, meshes, intersections, where two things intersect, transforming things, whether you want to move something, copy something, scale something, display in terms of like color and things like that. And then these over here are all plugins, which we will add later. We'll talk about later, but these will help us down the line a little bit. So we'll get into that stuff later. So I'm going to go to the curve tool here, and I'm going to create a primitive. This is kind of where all your basic, shapes are. And I'm going to use, I want to show a bunch of different ways that we can make some circles, right? So I'm just going to do the common way, which is the center, right? So you'll see that nothing, when I plug this, when I open this node, it's yellow, which tells me that nothing's plugged into it and it's not currently running. If it was red, if this was all red, that means that there's an error of some sort, that something you plugged in is not functioning the way you think it is. And if it's just gray, that means it's functioning normally, right? So here I'm creating a circle, and I need to put in 3 different things to create the circle. I need to put in the center, I need to put in the normal, and then the radius. So I'm gonna hover over here. What do we think we need to put in for the center? What should I put in there to create the center? Or what do you think it's asking for?
I'm gonna guess a point.
Point, perfect, yes. So we could drop a point in here, select it, and tie it to a parameter, but I'm gonna create a point just because that's more fun. So I'm going to go to the vector panel. I go over to the point tab, and I'm going to construct a point. So you'll see that when I do that, this one's gray automatically, which means that it kind of has standard values input. So you see that there is a point generated at 0, 0, 0. So I actually don't need to put anything in here. I could just plug this right into there, and that's good enough. But if we wanted to be cool, we could create a number slider. So I'm just gonna look up a number slider right there. I'm gonna change it to normal or just integers. I'm going to do to 100. I'm going to copy that 3 times so I can plug all the different values in and make a Z, a Y, and an X. They're all 0 right now, so nothing's changed. But if I wanted to, I could shift this around like so. So now I got a point in there. So now I have a center. I'm going to skip over normal for a second. So what do we think we're looking for a radius? What is it asking for?
A distance?
Distance. It's not, well, distance is a very specific term. It is looking for like a unit. It's looking for a number. That's all, or it could be any number. So I'm going to copy one of these sliders over here, and I'm going to plug that into radius, and you'll see that a circle has appeared, right? So I skipped over normal. We'll go back to that in a second, but now I have a circle that I can adjust the radius however I want. I can move it around however I want. It's not real. Like I said, it's all in, see the things that are red? That just means that it's in Grasshopper only. It's not actually in Rhino yet. But I can kind of adjust it as I need to and move it around, right? So now normal. Does anybody know what the term normal means? I heard that term before. Anybody have a guess at what a normal is?
Is that maybe a circle versus an ellipse?
No, good guess. I'm gonna hover over it so you can see what it says. Any other guesses?
Okay, so is that like the plane that it's created in, I guess? So like right now, it's just gonna be a flat circle. But if you were to plug something into normal, it might be like vertical.
So what do you think I should plug into there? So you're definitely, you're in the right, you're in the right place. It's a little bit different than that, but you're definitely in the right spot. So what do you think I should plug into normal, into that node to change it to a different plane?
A direction or a vector.
A vector, right? Perfect. So I should plug a vector in there. So I'll choose a vector. I'm going to choose an X vector, right? So X is this red line. As yes, X is that line right there. So if I plug this into normal, what way do we think the circle is going to shift? Like, or rotate? You think it's going to rotate? Let me see. Or let me draw on it maybe. So do we think it's going to rotate in like this and face kind of like this direction now? Or do we think it's going to rotate like this and face that direction now? What do we think?
The second one, so it faces the red.
Faces the red, right? So if I stop annotating here, clear, plug it in, boop, you are correct. It is facing the red, right? So what does that mean though? Like, so I said vector, and I'm talking about the X vector, which has a magnitude, a magnitude in a direction, like somebody said previously, and that magnitude is in the X direction, or the direction is in the X direction, and it only has a magnitude of 1, but that doesn't particularly matter. But what does it mean to be normal? Why wouldn't they just write vector? There's a specific quality of normal. So a normal is kind of illustrated right here. So you see I have a circle, and I have a point in the middle, and then I have an arrow pointing out, right? So what a normal is So this is a normal that's in the X direction, right? So I'm saying that this circle, its normal is in the X direction, meaning that a line that's perfectly perpendicular to the surface is going in the X direction. So if I was to make this circle a surface, and I put a line that was pointing in X, it would be 90 degrees to that surface, right? So it's basically from a specific point, what is like a 90 degree, like a line pointing directly straight out from that line, or from that point, right? This becomes it's not super important in this instance, but it becomes very important when you have a surface that's undulating or something, like you have a surface that's very curvilinear, let's say you lofted some crazy shape, and you wanted to draw a line directly out from a point on that shape that's all kind of undulating. You can find a point on that shape and say, hey, what is a normal from this point? And it'll generate a vector that's not going to be X, Y, or Z. It's going to be some combination of all of those that points directly straight out, right? This becomes very important later on, but like starting to kind of grasp that understanding of what a normal is will become very useful down the line. We'll probably talk about it 50 more times, and I'll probably say, hey, it's asking me for a normal. What does that mean? So we'll kind of learn, it'll pop up over and over again. But it's important to start to understand. Does anybody have any questions about that or not understand it at all? Okay. So now I have my circle, so I can change all of these things about the circle, and the circle just shifts and moves however I desire, and does whatever it needs to do, right? So if I was to create another one of these, so now I have two circles. I just selected all of those nodes, Control C, Control V. I'm gonna move it out like that. I'm gonna shift it in a direction. Oops, I want to move it this way. Now I have two circles on two different points. And if I really, really wanted to, I could loft these. So I could go to the surface command. I could go to freeform. I could loft them. I need two. So here's an instance where two things need to be plugged into the same spot, right? So here's my curves that need to be plugged in. I can just put one in, and then I can use shift and put the other in. And now I'm generating a surface from those two circles. But the cool thing about that is I can change them dynamically and shift things around if I don't like the way it's kind of working out. They're dependent on these things only. There's actually still nothing in Rhino. Nothing is in here. All this red is just being generated out of Grasshopper. If I wanted to put something in, I could do what I do before. What do I do to put something from Grasshopper in? Can somebody tell me what I do to put something from Grasshopper into Rhino? What's the fun term?
Bake.
Love it. It's a little egg. I can bake it. I can click a layer that goes on, and there we go. Now I have my first thing in Rhino right there, right? So I generated that. This is no longer connected, so I can move these things around and generate other ones if I want. All of this is being made only, they're all dependent on each other, right? So it's very cool. That's the power, right? So the other thing that, I'm putting just number sliders here, but I could generate these numbers in any way. All it wants is a number, right? So you could have an Excel file with 1 billion numbers in it, and you could say, I want all these circles generated by all of these numbers, that you created something in there. You could say, how much, we'll get into this later, how much sun is hitting this one spot on my building? And dependent on how much sun is hitting it, tell me a number from 1 to 10, let's say, whatever the number that comes out of it. tell me a number from 1 to 10, and I want you to adjust this circle on my building by the value in which is being generated from the amount of sun that's hitting it, right? Or it could be the amount of shade, or it could be the amount of wind, or it could be any possible combination of it's just a number, right? So I'm telling it a number, but you could generate that number in any way. So does that click a little bit? Does that make sense? Any questions about
that? I have one question.
Yep.
So when you baked that loft, it only created just the loft in Rhino, not the other circles as well?
Correct, yes. So whatever I click on, if I right click and bake, tell it where I want it to go, it's only putting in the thing that I clicked, right? So the circles aren't here. I don't have any circles. There's no circle here I can select. If I was to click on the circle, and I right click and bake, and I tell it to go to a layer, now I have a circle, right? So it's only baking the things that I put in, that I click on and click bake. And once you bake them, they're disconnected no matter what it is. So this isn't connected to this loft anymore. It's not connected to this one that I baked before. It's just in there now. You can also so as your scripts get more and more complicated, oops, I did what I, what did I do? So as your scripts get more and more complicated, you might start to not want to see some things. Like you may have 1,000, everything that you're creating in here is showing, is having a preview in here, and it might get, you might draw lines to kind of understand something with Grasshopper, but you may not actually want to show them ever. So let's say all I wanted to see was this loft. If I select, not all of these are visible things, but I'm just going to select all of them right now. If I select all of them and I middle click on my mouse, I have these kind of options, which also has bake. So you can bake all of these objects simultaneously. But let's say I wanted to hide them all. So I wanted to disable the preview. I can click on this that person with the blindfold, and now I can't see the circle anymore, right? When I click on it, it doesn't appear. I click on the points, I don't see the points anymore. They're still there. And if I change things, this still modifies, but it's not, I'm just not previewing it, right? If I right click on or middle click on this, I can hide that as well. I can middle click again and bring it back. I can select all these, middle click and bring them all back, right? So, those are, as your scripts get more and more powerful, it'll become more and more, they'll just get muddy inside of Grasshopper, and you might want to hide some of those things. What other questions do folks have? Okay. So let's see what else. Something else simple. So there's a bunch of different ways to, here's just circles, right? So there's a bunch of different ways to create circles. I just created a circle with a center, a normal, and a radius. You can also define a circle by a plane and a radius, right? So this just has a plane. And it's asking for a radius, right? So I can plug a radius in here, and I now have a circle like that. And I can see that those are all connected now to the same slider, so they all change together. The plane is, I believe you would find those in the vector tool. So if you didn't want it on the XY plane, I could come in here and I could say I want it on the XZ plane. And you can see that it pops up, here's the plane, that green thing right there. I can plug that plane in, and now it's flipped my circle to that plane. It still functions the same way. So that's another way to create a circle. I'm back to my curves, my primitives. You can also create a circle from 3 separate points, right? So I can create, let's see here. Let's take this point, paste, paste, move these points around a little bit. I'm gonna hide, I'm gonna delete this stuff. We don't need to see this anymore. I'm gonna create, I got that point. I have 3 points here. And all it's asking me is to plug 3 different points in. So I'll plug point A in, point B in, and point C in, and it creates a circle that grabs all 3 of those points, right? And if I change that, the circle adjusts to grab all 3 of those points. That's another way to create a circle. Let's see what else we got here. That's what we create a 3-point. You can create a circle that fits the best collection. So if I had many points, or actually let's not do it that way. Let me create a bunch of points. I'm going to use the parameter tool to get all of those points. So I'm going to right click, and since I have multiples, I'm going to set multiple points. I'm going to come over here, and I'm just going to swipe over those and get all those points. I'm going to plug those into there. Oh, what did I do? Did I grab something that wasn't a point? There we go. Must have grabbed something that wasn't a point. So now it's creating a circle that best fits those points. Doesn't touch them all, but it's the closest circle you can get with those points. And if I move these circles, or if I move these points around, then the circle changes. So that's another way to create a circle. So there's all kinds of ways to create different things. You know, you can create a circle based on tangents of 2 curves. You can create an ellipse, different ways to create an ellipse. You can create the in circle of a triangle, tangent from 3 curves. So all kinds of ways. There's also arcs, polygons, all those kind of things. Similarly, lines, all kinds of ways to create lines. So with those, you can just delete all these. Line is a bunch of different ways to create lines. So I can just put in 2 points. So I want that point as my start, that point as my end, and you can see that I've created a line between those 2 points. And if I shift it, that always stays connected. And you can do things like, now that I have this line, I don't know where this, I always forget where this is. Sometimes I forget what they're called. Not the midpoint of the line. Curve middle. If I can plug that in, and you can see that I now have the center point of that line. If I change it, you know, these are all different ways to kind of to manipulate things and always track where things are, right? Doesn't seem very useful right now to track those things, but trust me, as we get more and more complicated, you're going to be like, I just need the midpoint between that area and this area. I'm going to draw a line between them, and I'm going to find that spot using that tool, right? So you don't, not all of these things seem like, oh, I want a line. It's a physical thing I want to create. Sometimes you're just generating a line or a circle or an ellipse or a whatever to just understand where something might fall, or on that line you want to put a bunch of other lines or something like that. So does that make sense? Any other questions? It's not, doesn't, maybe, I don't know if it seems like a lot. I'd be curious if I feel that like, we can keep going, but I don't want to get too much in the weeds. First start with these kind of 2D objects, and then, you know, simple shapes, and then we'll move more and more advanced. Okay. I'm going to stop recording. Stop.